The cold rose from the stone floor like a living presence that crept into the marrow of my bones. It was a familiar cold, the damp and unforgiving chill of Rouen Castle in the grip of February. But it was not the stone that made me tremble. It was the hands, rough and hardened, moving across my skin with the detached curiosity of someone inspecting a piece of meat. I was 14, and I was treated as a possession.
Before me, seated on a heavy oak chair that might as well have been a throne, was the Duchess of Bedford, Jacquetta of Luxembourg. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were not cruel, but worse, they were calculating. They held no pity for the girl of 14, only a shrewd assessment of the asset before her. She was a woman who understood the brutal arithmetic of power, where a body like mine was a variable in an equation that could secure kingdoms or shatter them. 2 midwives flanked me, their faces grim and impassive, their fingers probing the most private, untouched part of my being. I was Blanche of Navarre, a name that felt like a borrowed gown, too heavy and ornate for the shivering child within. I was the future, a potential queen, and my entire world rested on the fragile seal of my flesh. One word from these women, one clinical pronouncement, and the life promised to me would evaporate like breath in the frigid air, leaving behind only the stain of disgrace.
This was not my first taste of such violation, only the first of its kind. The true violation had been one of silence, of absence. For 13 years, I had been wife to Henry IV of Castile, a king whose touch was as absent as his love. 13 years of sharing a royal bed that was a vast, cold continent between us. He never crossed it. Night after night, I lay there, feigning sleep, my body aching with a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical illness. The whispers in the corridors of the court were a constant poison. Was she barren, a witch who had frozen the king's ardor? Or was he impotent, unnatural? The shame was a shared cloak, but it was I who was forced to wear it in the open. They looked at me in the chapel, in the great hall, their eyes lingering on my flat belly, their smiles thin and sharp with pity and suspicion. Henry, my husband, hid behind a facade of piety and martial bluster, leaving me to face the silent inquisition, alone. Now, at 29, the silent question was to be answered with a shout. Strangers would certify the truth my body had endured for 13 years. They would peel back the layers of royal pretense and expose the barren, untouched reality of my marriage. My life had been a performance, and this was the final, brutal act, where the stage was stripped bare and the audience would finally learn the truth. The midwife on my left, an older woman with a web of lines around her eyes, paused. Her touch, which had been rough and methodical, softened for a fraction of a second. She looked up, not at the Duchess, but at me. Her gaze met mine, and in the depths of her tired eyes, I saw not a tool of the patriarchy, but a woman. I saw a flicker of shared sorrow, a ghost of understanding that passed between us in the charged silence of the chamber. It was an infinitesimal crack in the stone wall of my humiliation, a tiny spark of warmth in the encroaching cold. She knew. She knew this was not about virtue, but about validation, not about purity, but about politics. In that fleeting moment, she was not my examiner, she was a witness to my suffering. It was a strange and unexpected gift, a reminder that beneath the titles and the ceremony, we were both women, trapped in a world built by men to serve their ambitions. The realization did not lessen my fear, but it steadied me. It was a sliver of humanity in a profoundly inhuman moment, a secret acknowledgement that I was more than the sum of my parts. The other midwife, younger and harder, finished her inspection, and stepped back, her face impassive. The older woman withdrew her hand, the brief connection severed. They turned to the Duchess and began to speak in low, hushed tones. Their words, a death sentence or a reprieve. I watched Jacquetta's face, searching for a sign, a twitch of an eyebrow, a tightening of the lips. Nothing. She was a master of the unreadable expression, a skill honed in the treacherous courts of Europe, where a single glance could betray a fatal weakness.
My mind raced, tumbling through the grotesque catalogue of tests I had heard whispered about by ladies-in-waiting. The sieve test, a cruel piece of theater where a woman's purity was judged by her ability to hold water in a kitchen utensil, as if her very essence could defy the laws of nature. A leaky sieve meant a sullied maiden, her reputation draining away with the water onto the dusty floor before a crowd of leering men. Then there were the urine tests, where physicians claimed to divine a woman's history in the color and clarity of her water. The urine of virgins is clear and lucid, one odious text proclaimed, urinating with a subtle hiss. I imagined the daughters of kings, noble ladies raised on poetry and prayer, forced to squat over a chamber pot while a man listened for the sound of their virtue. There were occult rituals with magnets and fumigations with toxic smoke, each more bizarre and degrading than the last, all designed to solve this simple, central question that defined a woman's worth. Was she broken? These thoughts were a fever dream, a maelstrom of absurdity and terror. Yet here I was, living the most direct and invasive truth of them all. My worth was not in my mind, my lineage, or my soul. It was in a tiny, fragile membrane of tissue that could be torn by a fall from a horse or a day of strenuous labor, realities of life that meant nothing in the face of this obsession. The midwives finished their report. The Duchess of Bedford rose from her chair, the heavy velvet of her gown rustling like dry leaves. She walked towards me, her steps measured and deliberate. The cold stones seemed to bite at my feet with renewed venom. This was it, the culmination of 13 years of a phantom marriage, of a life lived in the shadow of a king's inexplicable indifference. I braced myself, my heart a frantic bird trapped in the cage of my ribs. I thought of Catherine of Aragon, another foreign queen whose body became a battleground for a king's desire, her most intimate history dissected by lawyers and theologians. I thought of Joan, the virgin warrior, who was examined in this very fortress, her divine visions weighed against the state of her hymen, as if God's voice could only echo through an unbroken seal. We were sisters in this silent, shared ordeal, our bodies the currency of men. Jacquetta stopped directly in front of me. Her face was still a mask, but her eyes held a new light, a cold, hard finality. She did not speak to me, but to the scribe waiting in the corner, his quill poised over a sheet of parchment. "Let the record show," she began, her voice clear and ringing in the stone chamber, "that Blanche of Navarre, Queen of Castile, has been examined by myself, Jacquetta the Duchess of Bedford, and by the midwives Agnes and Perrine." She paused, and the silence stretched, thin and taut. I felt my entire existence shrink to the space of that pause. "She is found to be," another agonizing beat, "Virgo intacta." The words hung in the air, clinical and cold. A virgin. Intact. It was the truth. It was a victory. But it tasted of ash. A wave of something that was not relief washed over me. It was a hollow, echoing emptiness. I had won. I had passed their test. My body had testified to my silent endurance, to my husband's failure. But in winning, I had lost everything.
A servant scurried forward, holding out my simple woolen shift. I took it, my hands shaking as I pulled it over my head.
the rough fabric a welcome, if insufficient, shield against the cold and the prying eyes. The ordeal was over, but the shame clung to me, a second invisible skin. The Duchess gave me one last dismissive glance before turning to leave, her work here done. She had secured her proof, a piece of political ammunition. My humanity was irrelevant. I was sent home to Navarre not long after. My marriage to Henry was annulled, my 13 years as Queen of Castile erased by a papal decree. I had proven my virginity, but at what cost? I had returned to my father's house not as a disgraced woman, but as something far stranger, a 29-year-old virgin queen, a symbol of a failed alliance, my body a testament to a marriage that was never real. My youth had been sacrificed on the altar of diplomacy, my dignity stripped away in a cold stone room, my dreams of a husband and children dissolved into whispers and court records. Years later, I would hear stories of other women, clever women, who fought back in their own ways. They used leeches to feign the blood of a wedding night, or smuggled in vials of chicken's blood hidden in their jewelry. They learned to constrict their muscles, to use herbs and tinctures to create the illusion of purity, all in a desperate bid to survive. They were deceivers, liars, and they were heroes. They understood that when the game is rigged, the only way to win is to cheat. I had not cheated. I had offered up the truth, and the truth had set me adrift. I was an object, validated and then discarded. My purpose served. The memory of the midwife's fleeting glance remained my only solace, a tiny anchor in a sea of degradation. It was a reminder that even in the darkest, most oppressive of rooms, a flicker of shared humanity could exist. I would never marry again. I would live out my days in the gilded cage of my birthright, a perpetual virgin, a queen of nothing. The world would remember me as a footnote in the history of a weak king, but I would remember the cold stone on my bare feet. I would remember the calculating eyes of the Duchess and the rough, probing hands of strangers. And I would remember that my body, my own precious, private body, was never truly my own. It was a kingdom to be conquered, a text to be read, a seal to be inspected. And its story, written in silence and humiliation, was the horrific, unspoken truth of what it meant to be a woman who wore a crown. My survival was not a triumph. It was a testament to the profound and enduring cruelty of a world that saw a throne where it should have seen a soul.